Welcome back to Morning Call. I'm Alyce.
And I'm Crystal.
And we're going to pick up our conversation about the different ways in which our movement practices, right? We've identified 5 different ways we move: mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and energetic. And we talked a lot about the spiritual movement and different practices, and we're going to move into the physical movement and practices that we've used and that continue to show up and support us through our own process of grief. So Crystal, you want to kick us off with sharing some about how movement has physically shown up for you?
Yes, absolutely. So, I have a few thoughts. I'll kick off with maybe 2 of the first ones. One was, and I know you had a similar experience, in the acute, immediate aftermath of losing my dad, I'm a big exerciser, mover, not just yoga, but like running, cycling, all the things. And I just did not want to exercise right away. I just grief was almost so exhausting that I was too tired to do anything. Or even my adrenaline was running constantly that I was I feel like if I move, I'm going to explode. If I moved more. So really a couple weeks right afterwards, I didn't do much. And then I remember I was I have to run. I just was I wanted to run until I could not run any further. I was I'm going to go run a marathon. I did not, but I just felt this desire to run. That was the only type of movement I felt called to do. From an exercise perspective, yes, but I just felt I have to I felt I was processing emotions through running them out of me, if that makes sense. And that kind of lasted, it's been a long time now, but it lasted a while. Almost a month or 2. I didn't want to get to any other type of exercise. And I was doing some yoga, and I know that you've had kind of an experience with your yoga practice. And I was doing some yoga, but I found that I was crying in Shavasana, which is great. It's a good form of release, but it became much more of an emotional practice in that immediate aftermath. And I know you kind of have something similar that you experienced, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to do anything. I was I knew the emotional practice that at that point went hand in hand with my yoga and physical practice. And it was probably a good several months before I went back to yoga. And when I did, it was I went to a place where I knew people. And so it was immediate hugs and physical embraces and just tears. Just
Right.
and
Oh, yeah.
being in postures and crying. And I think that was one of the reasons I stayed away from it for so long was because I was I'm gonna be a ball of mess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah.
And I was and then I came to a point where I was well, screw it. If someone can't handle it, they can move. They don't have to ask me if I'm okay or not,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
luckily it was a space and a community where I could show up completely authentic and exactly how I was in the moment, and I felt safe enough to do that.
That's good.
Which I'm so grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, yeah, and then that got kind of I feel once those emotions kind of moved is when all of a sudden I went from doing nothing to wanting to do everything. And I got this really big burst of creative energy. And I signed up for 3, I signed up for a doula training, a
I love that.
choreographic mentorship that was all online at the time, and light year leadership training. So I
Yeah.
went
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
doing nothing to all of a sudden I was
doing all the
I
things.
dove straight in. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost like, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do something with my life all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Um, and it was really beautiful. Like the choreographic mentorship was every week we would meet as a cohort and we would dance together. We would be led through a class by one of the mentors, and then given an assignment. And so every week, and then we had to film ourselves in that assignment. And and then at the end of the week, we would all get together and we would watch each other's film, and we would share feedback and get feedback, and it really became this moment of like where I really started to lean into more so my creative voice as a creator, and not specifically like set choreography, but really moving and honing like my own voice in intuitive movement and like what was showing up for me. Out of that, I wound up making a film, of all the movement that I created during that time.
I don't think I've seen that. I need to see that.
Yeah, it's called Glimpses of Me, and it is really inspired because it was like on a weekly basis. It's almost like a timeline of how I was processing my grief in that moment. And um and like the very end, I was in Costa Rica for the first time. I went back for a retreat, leading a retreat, and we had gotten there a couple of days early, and I decided to go film myself on the beach dancing. And I don't know, I was out there for like an hour or so, and I was like wearing a dress and wound up getting like drenched. And then all of a sudden, this wave, I saw it coming, but I was so in the moment that like all of a sudden I like looked back at the camera because the wave came and went right up to, knocked my shoes out, knocked my phone out. And you can hear on the film, like the unedited version, I just looked and you hear me go, oh shit.
That's
But it's
awesome.
like I used that in the film because, and some of the feedback that I got was like, it was picturesque. Like I'm on the beach in Costa Rica, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's
Like a magical place like Costa Rica. Yeah.
waves and the movement and the sky, this like vast, um, you know, possibility of like, and it's like, it felt hopeful for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, here comes this massive ass wave, and it knocked everything out. And some of the feedback that I got from viewers of it was like, that's just life, right? Like
True.
oh shit moments of like, it's
Yep.
everything's going to be taken out in a
Yep.
moment, and it can.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful
You can't
reminder
predict
of
it.
like, you can't predict it. And it felt really full circle in that moment. And it was almost like that, like, I feel like that was kind of a great energetic shift for me to like be on the beach and to be the year before, well, before the pandemic. um my mom and my aunt had talked my mom into wanting to come on one of my retreats with me, and they were originally going to come February 2020, and my aunt was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at the end of 2019. So it had put that all on halt. And so being back in Costa Rica and like having like, it was hard. It was like, it was very, it was almost like I was supposed to be sharing that with them. And there was like such an immense amount of like peace and gratitude for like, oh, I'm sharing it with them. Here we
Yeah.
are. Well,
Yeah.
more so with my mom because my aunt at the time was still with us. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, it was really special.
Yeah.
And
That
that
reminds
physical
me of,
movement for me was really, sorry,
go ahead.
was really leaning into like trusting my own natural movement.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that became my practice.
Like more intuitive
Mm-hmm.
movement. Like, yeah, listening to
Yeah, absolutely.
what your body's telling you to do. just saying that you like shared that practice, with them, even though they weren't like physically there, just reminds me of, what I told you offline and haven't said here yet, but that I felt a big calling. I mean, and still do. Like you said, even when you were like, I feel like I need to do something with my life and like do all the things. I have felt like since my dad passed, like I still have a physical body and he no longer does. So it's like I have been wanting to like experience all the physical things, um, whether that's through movement or even just like it's helped me. I mean, and this is not like it's not a perfect practice. It's not like every day, but it's like I can still enjoy the taste of like good food, which is a physical type of practice. I can still enjoy like viewing a sunset, and like he doesn't have the ability to do that anymore. And I just remember there was like a level of gratitude that was added to my movement, whether it was my running or whether it was my yoga practice or whether it was looking at a sunset or whatever. I remember, you know, it being on my mind a lot more in those first like earlier years. Um, that I was like, I have to like enjoy the physicality of my body now that he no longer can. And now that it's been 6 years. I mean, I don't, I feel like I'm not quite as attuned to that, but it's like a good reminder that like we can still enjoy these things with them and like their spirit and they're with us for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was gonna say you just posted a video about it was a reel you made, and I think it was you all traveling down to Miami, and I think there was one part it was like on the beach, and you were like, "Did anyone see it?" Um, and I was like, "I saw it." Will you talk a little bit about what that was? And it's like, yeah, it's like I think that it's that reminder too that yes, we want to do. I think it's more so like the power of presence. Like, how present are we when, like, we see the sun coming up or like the clouds being magnificent in the sky or, like really honoring and being grateful for our time here on earth. And on the other side of that, of like using, I think we talked about this last time, but like using those as signs that they're with us,
Absolutely.
right? And that we are sharing it with them still.
Totally. Yeah, we had stopped by the beach and I mean we had the dogs with us. That it was like a beach that you couldn't really bring the dogs on. So my husband and I had switched off like one of us was back with the dogs and one of us kind of like went to look at the beach. I mean, and take some videos and it was beautiful. And I didn't notice it but during one of my videos, there was a blue orb like in my video. And for those people potentially listening that don't know what that can mean, it's like it can mean if you see an orb in a video, it means like a spirit is potentially there with you. And so when I looked back at it as I was making the reel, I'm like, oh my God, like was that my dad? Possibly. Or like my grandmother also passed a few years ago now, and I was like, maybe it was her. Like somebody was there with us on that beach. And like I mean, I like to think I was present, like just like taking in, even it was just like 5, 10 minutes, but like taking in the view of the beach and it was like white sand and beautiful day. And I was like, oh, maybe they were there with us. One of them was there, both of them, who knows, enjoying that view. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I love that. Yeah. And I was like, and I saw it and I just, and and that's like, it's interesting. It makes me think about, I don't have any answers for this. And it's like, what is their physical movement and like how it
yeah,
shows up in our physical worlds,
yeah,
like of whether it's spirit, of like, or their energy
yeah,
being present with us here now still. And another thing I want to mention too, it's like we talk about physical movement, but it's also how and where we move in the world, right? And I know you and your husband have made amazing moves to live part time in Charlotte as well as part time in Miami. Can you just talk about like how that came about? And I feel like in witnessing you do that, like it's a big part of you living fully present and in your joy, right? Like not waiting till we retire to make that happen. Like you can have that now.
Yeah, yeah, I think for sure it was definitely driven by his death. So my dad died suddenly and he did not get to retire. And I mean, that just broke me a little bit. Like I was like, he did not get, I mean, he enjoyed his life. You know, it's not like he didn't enjoy it when he was here, but I was like, you know, he and my mom had all these plans to like do XYZ when they retired. And I just was like, he didn't get to enjoy that. And it really lit a fire under me that I was like, and you know, I realize that I'm privileged to be able to, you know, some people like just can't financially, they have to wait. Like I understand um, that's a choice that some people like have to make. But we just were like, you know what? We both had, my husband and I ended up getting remote jobs like before the pandemic, and then kind of like people went remote. And we were like, you know what? Let's not wait, you know, like people wait and that's fine. But we were like, we can work from anywhere. Let's just kind of like scope out potential places to live. We love the heat. Then the pandemic hit because that was like right, it was like 5 months before the pandemic. And then we obviously couldn't move right away. But once we kind of like felt safe enough, kind of like later in 2021, we like revisited the topic and we're like, we were looking at like warm weather places. Miami came up. My husband never been. I'm like, let's just go visit. And then of course he loved it. And I was like, let's just do it. Like life is short. You never know when it's going to be your last day. And let's just do it now. And yeah, I mean, like literally physically moving half the year down here has been really fun. Like people joke, they're like, you're the youngest snowbirds that we know.
I love it.
um, yeah, I mean, and just in general, like you know, my mom was visiting recently and we have a camper van and she was like asking about like what inspired us to also get that and like do the move. And I just was like, again, like dad dying just really lit a fire under my, you know what, to like just do the damn thing now when we can and when we're healthy, because sometimes people get sick and you're not able to travel or do the things. So I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered your question, but yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that that's, it's like the physical movement of where and how we move in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're doing something that lights up your inner being, your highest self, right? And doing that with your partner is so beautiful. And it's inspiring, right? Like, to
Thank
be
you.
that living,
Well,
breathing example, that it's possible. Like if you have those, that desire, right? And it doesn't have to be this grand dream either. Like, yes, I want that, I want a grand, my grand dream of like, moving in and around the world and with ease and with my family um but it also starts with like, some days I have to remind myself that like we're all trying to get somewhere, right? Especially in Charlotte and this insane traffic, right? Or like, how am I moving when I'm at the grocery store? Like what kind of energy am I sharing right now? Yeah, and like taking the time to really get present now, because even in that mundane it can feel a little like, yeah, like it's not always grief, and like there's parts of it, right? Like there's things that happen in life, and what can I do? Like I know I have a choice of how I show up in the grocery store, or how I drive my car, or
yeah. This reminds me of
um
a quote that my therapist told me like a million years ago, it was even before my dad passed. I think at the time, I don't even remember. I was like maybe having like questions about career change, and I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, I think I was like bored with what I was doing. Anyway, but she was like, you may have heard of this, but it's like an old, I'm going to probably butcher it, but it was like an old Buddhist monk saying, and it really helped me. And then I feel like I've applied it to your point even more since experiencing loss. But it was, you know, the monks, it was like a story of monks having to like take water up and down to the like monastery from the well, like down the hill or something. And it's like they have to do it every day because you have to drink water. And she was like, even the Buddhist monks, who are like some of the most peaceful people in the world, still have to take the water up and down the hill every day. But it's not take the act of taking the water, it's how you take the water. You know what I mean? Like how you choose to move through the mundane, even. Um, so yeah, that just
I heard
reminds me
something
of.
similar not too long ago, and it was like, it was something along the same lines, Buddhist monks, and someone came in and like gave them a pulley system. And they were like, here, it'll make your life so much easier. And they said, no, I'm not looking for easy. Like and if I stop doing what I do every day, I'll forget how to do it. Like, and I'll forget how, like, that joy that brings me of like, this service, this act of service of like what I'm contributing, not only to myself, but to the people around me. And I was like, ugh. It's just like, it's not always easy, right? It's not always, um, well, life is not easy, right? Like it's, and I think we've said this before, is that we have a choice to bring ease to what it is that is present for us.
Yeah, I think that makes me think of kind of two things. One is like an actual physical practice, my yoga practice change. I think I've been practicing since 2009. My dad died in 2017. Like it was definitely already more of like a spiritual emotional practice for me, but I I got my 200-hour teacher training like after he passed, years after, but still it was like something changed in me where I was like I want to take my practice deeper, like whatever that means. It wasn't just physical. Like I was like I kind of want to learn the history of yoga and like how to better connect my breath. Like I just kind of I started going on retreats and I like it just made me want to take my practice deeper for whatever reason, number one. And then I also got into gardening, like talking about the pulley system and like, taking the water every day, like the act of gardening and like having my hands in the dirt. I mean, I've never been a gardener before. Um, and I was like, we're going to start a garden. And it's like, it has brought me so much joy and it's so simple to like care for something, and like see it grow, like at the physical aspect of growth. Like, does that make sense? I'm not making sense, but it has brought so much joy to my life.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So those are like a couple things that I've like started since then.
Yeah, and that is an active movement, right? Like not in just of you physically tending to a garden, um, and like the movement that generates in the world around you and in your environment of like, something physically being planted and
Yeah.
growing, right? Like and it being like giving back and it contributing to like, is it, is it a flower garden? Is it a vegetable garden or
But vegetables. I mean, I have plants, yeah, but it's a veggie garden, and like,
yeah. So you're like literally like providing food and source for yourself and like and that is such a beautiful and powerful energetic, and I think we've, touched on this a bit too of like I feel, and maybe we haven't, I feel like when, it's the life cycles constantly, right? Like when something ends, something also begins, right? And so it's like, and I think, one of the reasons we're here too is to like change and start to shift the dialogue around when these cycles end, right? And I think we've been taught as a society to like keep it to ourselves or not talk about it or like deal with it on our own. And that's not how like new life begins, right? At least not for me.
yeah, I mean, it would be like, I mean, literally with the seasons, it would be like when fall comes, like if everybody just put blinders on and acted like the leaves weren't falling off the trees, or like, do you know what I mean? It's like we as a society are too afraid to talk about like that death, and even, then ultimately like the rebirth in the spring. But people, people acknowledge the trees and that they fall and that it's a beautiful time of year. But like when it comes to like physical human death, we're afraid to talk about it. And it's like we are cyclical beings as well, just like the trees. And um or even a garden, it's like you reap the garden, you eat the veggies, and you like are grateful for the food it provides. And then like the plants die off. If there's some, I mean, I'm making this up. If there's summer veggie, it's not going to last through the winter. And you like, then you replant some, it has fertile soil for something else to grow for your like fall, winter garden. And it's like, I wish we could treat like physical human life with the same way, but we're too afraid to as a society, which is just silly to me.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I think that goes back to having gratitude for what is, right? Like in the moment, here we are, and this is what, you know, and really honoring and recognizing the power of like that moment, and that movement, right? Because, and also because it's fleeting, right? Like everything's temporary, right? I think that goes lends to the practice um, of non-attachment, right? Like being able to, like, that has been a huge practice of like, even for me in my yoga practice and my dance practice, right? Like two physical practices that I've been in dance for probably, well, not probably 30 years. And yoga, similarly, I started around 2007 on and off and really got into it. My most consistent practice was like 2013 and on. And I have a hard, and it has seemed hard for me to let go of what my practice used to be, right? Because like I think it comes more from like my dance background of like knowing what my body was capable of compared to like what I'm capable of now. Right. And what the work has been, especially coming back to it after I lost my mom and like my body was very still. So it's like my mobility wasn't all there. My body was changing shapes. Like I was holding weight in different places. And that, you know, for me and my past versions of myself, right? Which I've also had to mourn and let go of, like, you know, but it's also like there's some very deep trauma in myself from dancing, um, that I've had to heal, right? And know that and learn to like detach myself from what I used to be.
Yeah. Do you think loss has helped with that? I mean, like, has it? Because I know for me, it's helped me. Not that I'm like completely detached and some like enlightened person. That's not what I mean. But it has certainly helped me understand, to your point, how fleeting things are, whether it's our bodies, like our bodies change, whether it's our financial status, whether, I mean, whatever, it could be anything. Um, and it's helped me. I think people can look at it both positively and negatively. Like I'm like, nothing is forever. So, which, I mean, it sounds negative, but I'm like, it actually helps you live when you accept that. I think it helps you live more in the present. So, do you feel like that has helped you?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's it's still work,
Yeah,
right?
of
Like
course.
it's like, more of like a self-acceptance
Mhm.
and like I know when I'm physically moving in my body, I feel better about myself.
Yeah.
Like
Oh, yeah.
just I know that about me.
Mhm.
And there are definitely times when I don't want to right now,
Mhm.
and that um so it's a interesting
Mhm.
balance to navigate, like really honoring like when I need to rest and when I'm just being resistance, because I do find that I'm sometimes choose not to move because I'm also afraid of what's going to come out, right? Like because it's not going to be what it was. Um and I think that's more of my practice. Like that's the mental movement that I have to like it's okay. Like, just be in it. Like, um, and also understanding that, like, I'm not at a time in my life where I'm, going to ballet even once a week now, So, like, it's like, you don't have to be doing that either. Like, that's just part of the internal conversation that I have with myself.
Yeah. Like letting go of expectations or trying to let go of expectations. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also made that when I do show up in those spaces, I do have an elevated sense of joy and presence because I'm like, "Oh, I am an able
Yeah.
body." Right? Like, this is a gift to be here, and to continue using my body as an instrument to share
Yes.
emotion, to create art with, to um be a living, breathing example of, like, my highest self, right? Of
Yes.
source. Like, even it's like
Yeah.
I am a conduit of something in that moment. And yeah, and it's like, I think, to, circle it back around, it's like to be able to detach, right? Like, I think something else came up when you were talking about, um in this detachment, and it really became clear. I was reading Untamed, and I know we've
Mhm.
mentioned that last time.
Yeah.
um of saying, like, and getting really clear of, like, how I speak to Amelia,
Yeah.
um that, like, I won't always, like, mommy's always going to be here for you. I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
not always
Right.
going to be here for you, because
Yeah.
that's life, right? Like, and
Right.
there's a
Yeah.
level, and you're not always going to be here for me. I mean, God
Right.
willing, I go before she does.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and part of that practice, of detachment is that, like, oh, she said, Glennon said, you will always be here for you. Right? So as
Mhm.
long as you're trusting your knowing,
Yeah.
like, I will be with you in your heart always. And, like, and so it's like really getting clear with, like, how we're talking. And I'm giving Amelia the permission to, already navigate this loss in a greater sense of, like, her own self knowing,
Right. Right. Like you can trust yourself.
which helps us move in the
Yeah.
world.
Like she can
Yeah.
learn to trust
Which helps us
herself.
move in a world with
Yeah. Like
presence.
if you're not around, she can still trust herself. Like that's so important. And we all can. Like I think, you know, there's so much self doubt in the world and kind of insecurity, which are all normal things. But it's like, how can we better trust ourselves and our own intuition and our own, like just listening to our own voices? I mean, it's hard, it's a practice too. Um, but yeah, I think when, I mean, especially like a parent, such a guiding force is taken from you. I mean, it's good that you're talking to her about that now, like before you're gone, because I think once that person is gone, like someone like a mother, someone like a father who is like an advice giver, a guide, you're almost like, well, they're not here, so I have to trust myself. Do you know what I mean? So it's so important that you're talking about that.
And it's been really powerful, um, to really lean into, I I didn't anticipate my mom not being here.
Right.
That was never even, like, that was not in my
No,
vision
not
for
on the
my
vision
life
board.
ever.
Not on the vision board.
Right? Like, I mean, her mother lived to be 94. Her grandmother, my great grandmother, lived to be 98.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, that was just not in the cards or something we ever
Yeah.
considered. And I think more than anything, what it has offered is, like, well, one, the presence of, like, the temporariness of it all, and two, where was I going with this? Yeah, that it's like, it's temporary, and, like, how we choose to be in the moment and what we live with, or yeah, just how we move in the
Yeah.
world is really is so important to be in that choice.
Yeah, and as much
And to
as
or to recognize that we have the choice, you know?
yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, as much as like I'm sure either one of us would love to have our parent back, I am grateful for that um, lesson, right? That like it's helped me to live more fully in the present, um, because I know nothing is forever, and it's helped me have a more like vibrant life in the now. So like, it's like I hate that we had to learn that lesson potentially earlier than other folks. I mean, there's all kinds of losses that people learn
Yeah,
that lesson. Um,
absolutely.
but it is a beautiful lesson, so I'm
Well, I
grateful for
think
it.
that's the lesson, right, of letting go, right? Like
Yeah.
that is like there's a saying, let go and let God, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Whether you call it God or not, like
Hmm.
trusting, like I to me that is like that is the lesson that I was supposed to learn, and like that is the lesson that I feel like I'm supposed to teach, right? And to provide tools to Amelia and to anyone that crosses my path, that like also to like, it's like when the wave came and knocked my phone out, right? To let go of like what that moment was supposed to, like what I wanted it to look like or what I thought. And what happened is like when I let go of that expectation, when I let go of those expectations, it probably winds up happening 10 times greater than I could have ever possibly planned.
Well, and it's like you said, that was the part that people responded to the most, right? So that's like so,
The most.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like that's like one of the things that like I continuously see in my own physical practice, that when I let go of how it used to be or expectations of myself, or
What it's supposed to look
even
like or
in
whatever.
my own art, yeah, even in my own artistic practice, I love, like I always have a blueprint, and I
Hmm.
work spontaneously in the movement, call it improv, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
um like those are the moments that I feel so connected. Like I feel connected to my source. I feel connected to the audience. I
Hmm.
feel and that has been such a beautiful thing to
Yeah.
experience in my own physical practice, and then watching and teaching Amelia that like sometimes we just have to let go of that expectation.
Yeah. And I think,
And I think that that's a level of,
no, go ahead.
go ahead. No, I think that's a level, like that's like unconditional love, like a core value of mine, of like loving without
Hmm.
condition, without an expectation. Like we love, or I love, not expecting it in
Yeah.
return.
Yeah. What I was going to say, I think I love the idea of a blueprint, but then also performing or living with fluidity in the blueprint. It's like, I think we're not saying don't make any plans or like, don't, I mean, you and I are big believers in like a vision board. Like, we're not saying like, well, uh, you know, nothing is permanent, so just screw it. Don't plan anything. No, it's like, it's still okay to like have dreams and a plan and a vision and make a blueprint. Like we should do those things. We're just saying like also work within the fluidity of said blueprint. Like things might go a little bit different than the exact blueprint, and that's life and that's okay. Um and it makes the journey that much better and like almost fun. Like the wave. You're like, oh my God, like this was the part that was like most responded to. So it's a balancing act with the two.
Well, it's like I think that's a part of like, yeah, that's a part of light year, right? It's like you create a vision, you create goals. And we've done the work together, right? And then
Mhm.
and what I have found and experienced, that like when I have a clear path of like my X, Y, and Z, one, it happens so much quicker
Yeah.
than I ever imagined. And two, it happens 10 times greater than I ever
Yeah.
pictured, right? But I still have like I have stepping stones to put my sight on, right? And that's like a part of, I think, another practice, maybe more of a mental practice and an energetic practice, potentially spiritual practice of,
Yeah.
manifesting,
Mhm.
right? Manifesting what you want to have happen, right? Like, I mean, of course, no one manifest. Oh, I mean, well, hope not. Maybe some do, but your parents dying or
Right.
anyone dying, right? Like, I know for me, that's not. Again, that was not in my vision, and
Right. That was not on your bingo card.
no, it was not on my bingo card. And part of the letting go that wasn't supposed to happen to me or to my mom was and is like so much it's made life sweeter, in a sense. It's made how I mother sweeter. Oh, I remember what I was going to say too. It's like I've also allowed myself to recognize the vast amount of nurturing I get from other women, right? Like, it's opened up this beautiful, like, I am nurtured. And there are specific women in my life that I consider like a second mother. And I'm so grateful that, like, in this lifetime, in this now, I can also like appreciate and call them up and say thank you. Or like when they text me out of the blue and like, it's like, how did you know that I needed that right
Yeah.
now?
They're like energetically connected to you.
Yes. And I say this a lot, like with birthdays, we don't have to wait till it's our birthday to celebrate ourselves. We don't have to wait till the first of the new year to
Set intentions or,
make a
yeah,
new
exactly.
choice, to set yes, like, we don't have to wait till Mother's Day to appreciate the mothers in our life, right? Like, it is, or even Father's Day, right? Like, we don't have to wait. Um, and really understanding that too, that there are plenty of men in my life too that nurture me
Like mothering
in a
energy.
mothering
Yeah.
way.
Like nurturing, caring energy.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yes, and that feminine energy that I need sometimes. And um yeah, and I think that's like it goes back to like being able to share these conversations with Amelia now.
I love that. And I love that she can see you create your community and like she knows that like, okay, this is something you can do for yourself, to care, create your like group of care around yourself.
Yeah, and I don't think that like my mom was like specifically intentional in creating this band of women around me that I do look upon as mothers. And I think that like, and maybe it was, it's not a conversation we ever had. There was an intentional energy that like there were these people lined up in my life to support me in that moment, and that continue to support me to this day. Thank you for joining the Morning Call podcast. Our intention is that you found a nugget of hope, inspiration, connection, or all of the above.
If you seek to dive deeper with the Morning Call community, email us, subscribe to our page, leave a review, and fill out our survey.
We want to hear your stories and widen the conversation to support and empower our grief experiences as we collectively become our true selves.
Find us and subscribe on all streaming platforms, YouTube, and at Morning Call Podcast on Instagram. You can also email us at morningcallpodcast@gmail.com.
This podcast was edited by Alexis Carrasquillo from Familia Creative Media.